Hello and welcome to JK Wisdom Beyond Time, a place where ancient wisdom meets modern life and where timeless truths help us understand the deeper patterns that shape our human experience. I'm truly grateful that you're here. Have you ever caught yourself checking your phone, hoping that someone liked your post? Waiting for a message that never came? Replaying a conversation in your mind, wondering whether people approved of what you said or who you are? Perhaps you worked harder than necessary, not because you loved the work itself, but because you wanted to be recognized, to be appreciated, to be accepted. And if you're honest, most of us know this feeling. The quiet desire to belong, the longing to feel valued, the hope that somewhere, in the eyes of other people, we might finally discover our own worth. This desire is deeply human. It is not a weakness. It is not a flaw. For thousands of years, human beings survived through connection. To be accepted by the tribe meant safety. To be rejected meant uncertainty. And so, the need for validation became woven into the fabric of our psychology. But something has changed. In the modern world, the tribe is no longer a small group of people living around a fire. It is millions of strangers, followers, comments, likes, opinions, expectations. And without realizing it, many of us have begun asking the world a question that no one else can truly answer for us. Am I enough? The tragedy is that external validation feels wonderful, but only for a moment. The praise arrives, the approval comes, and for a brief period, the mind feels at peace. Yet before long, another question appears. Another expectation. Another need to prove ourselves. And the cycle begins again. So why do we seek validation so deeply? Why does acceptance from others carry such power over the human heart? And perhaps more importantly, is it possible to build a life where our sense of worth no longer depends entirely upon the opinions of the world around us? Tonight, we explore that question together. Not as a rejection of love, community, or human connection, but as an invitation to discover a deeper source of confidence. One that remains steady even when applause fades, expectations change, and the world moves on. Because perhaps the greatest freedom a person can experience is this: to be appreciated by others, but no longer defined by their approval. A few years ago, a young man finally achieved something he had dreamed about for nearly a decade. He received a promotion, a better salary, a more respected position. Friends congratulated him. Family members expressed their pride. And for a brief moment, he felt exactly what he had always hoped to feel. Complete, successful, accepted. But a few weeks later, something unexpected happened. The excitement began to fade. The approval that once felt so powerful slowly became normal. And almost without realizing it, his mind found a new question to worry about. What comes next? What if people no longer admire me? What if I fail to meet their expectations? What if this success is not enough? The validation that once brought peace had quietly transformed into pressure. And perhaps many of us understand this feeling. We work hard to gain acceptance. We achieve something meaningful. We receive the recognition we hoped for. Yet the satisfaction rarely lasts as long as we imagined. The human heart begins searching for the next source of approval, the next achievement, the next confirmation that we are worthy. This pattern appears everywhere in modern life. A teenager posts a photograph online and checks every few minutes to see how many people have responded. An employee sacrifices personal well-being to earn recognition at work. A parent feels responsible for living up to expectations that have been carried across generations. Someone says yes to commitments they do not truly want, simply because disappointing others feels unbearable. On the surface, these situations seem completely different. Yet beneath them lies the same quiet desire. The desire to be accepted. The desire to feel that we matter. the desire to know that our existence holds value in the eyes of other people. And there is nothing shameful about this. Human beings are social creatures. Connection has always been essential to our survival. Love, friendship, and belonging are among life's greatest gifts. The problem begins when acceptance from others becomes the primary foundation upon which we build our identity. Because external approval is constantly changing. People change. Expectations change. Society changes. And if our sense of worth depends entirely upon forces outside our control, peace becomes incredibly fragile. Many people spend years living according to invisible audiences, making decisions not because they align with their deepest values, but because they fear judgment. Choosing careers that earn admiration, suppressing emotions that might appear inconvenient, pursuing lives that look successful from the outside while feeling disconnected within. Perhaps the most difficult realization in adulthood is understanding that no amount of external validation can permanently answer an internal question. The question, am I enough? Because if we do not learn to answer that question for ourselves, the world will continue offering temporary responses. And we will continue searching for certainty in places that were never designed to provide it. Maybe true acceptance begins at the moment we stop performing for an audience and start listening to the quieter voice that has been waiting within us all along. Modern psychology tells us something deeply important about the human need for validation. The desire to be accepted is not a defect in human nature. It is part of our evolutionary inheritance. For most of human history, survival depended upon belonging to a group. To be accepted meant protection. To be rejected meant danger. The human brain learned very early that connection was essential for life itself. And even today, thousands of years later, that ancient programming still lives within us. Researchers have found that social rejection activates many of the same neural pathways as physical pain. In other words, the brain does not simply interpret rejection as an unpleasant experience. It interprets it as a threat. This is why criticism can remain in our minds for years. Why a single negative comment can outweigh 100 compliments. Why the fear of disappointing others often feels stronger than the desire to express our authentic selves. The mind is trying to protect our place within the tribe. But the modern world has expanded the tribe beyond anything our ancestors could have imagined. Today, approval is no longer limited to family, friends, or local communities. It comes from social media, professional networks, online audiences, public opinions, and endless comparisons with people we have never met. Every notification delivers a small burst of dopamine, the brain's reward chemical. A like, a comment, a message, a sign that we have been noticed and accepted. And for a brief moment, we feel significant. But dopamine is designed to motivate pursuit, not provide lasting fulfillment. The pleasure fades. The mind begins seeking the next source of validation, the next achievement, the next confirmation that we are worthy. And slowly, approval becomes a habit rather than a gift. Psychologists sometimes describe this pattern as contingent self-worth. The belief that our value depends upon external success, recognition, or acceptance. When things go well, we feel confident. When approval disappears, our sense of identity begins to shake. People-pleasing often emerges from the same foundation. Many individuals learn early in life that love and acceptance are connected to performance. Being the responsible child, the successful student, the person who never causes problems, the one who always says yes. These behaviors may bring appreciation from others, but they can also create a quiet fear. The fear that if we stop performing, we might stop being loved. Yet, healthy self-esteem develops differently. It recognizes that human worth is inherent, that mistakes do not erase dignity, that disagreement does not equal rejection. And that being accepted by everyone has never been a realistic requirement for living a meaningful life. Perhaps one of the greatest psychological shifts a person can make is moving from external validation to internal validation. Not rejecting a love and appreciation of others, but no longer depending upon it as the sole measure of one's value. Because when our identity rests entirely in the hands of other people, peace becomes unpredictable. But when we begin to cultivate self-respect from within, something extraordinary happens. Approval becomes something we enjoy, rather than something we desperately need. And perhaps that is where true emotional freedom begins. Long before the modern world began measuring worth through followers, titles, and public recognition, ancient thinkers were asking a very different question. What remains when all external approval disappears? Who are we when no one is watching? And perhaps, more importantly, can a human being live according to truth rather than applause? Ancient Indian wisdom often returned to the idea that every person possesses an inner center that exists beyond social roles and temporary achievements. A person may be admired one day and criticized the next. They may experience success in one season and failure in another. Yet beneath these changing circumstances, something deeper remains unchanged. The challenge then was never to reject society or human relationships. It was to avoid losing oneself within them. One of history's most profound conversations takes place between a warrior facing uncertainty and a guide who invites him to look inward rather than outward. The warrior is deeply troubled, not only by the decisions before him, but by the expectations surrounding those decisions. He worries about judgment, about consequences, about how others will perceive his actions. And perhaps every human being has experienced a similar moment. The moment when we know what feels right within ourselves, yet hesitate because we fear disappointing the world around us. Ancient wisdom offered a powerful response. Act according to your deepest values, not according to the applause you hope to receive. This does not mean becoming indifferent to other people. It does not mean rejecting advice, community, or responsibility. Rather, it means recognizing that approval is a gift, but integrity is a foundation. When our actions are guided entirely by external recognition, we become dependent upon forces we cannot control. Praise lifts us upward. Criticism pulls us downward. And our inner peace rises and falls with the opinions of others. But when our actions are rooted in sincerity and inner conviction, something begins to change. We still appreciate encouragement. We still value meaningful relationships. Yet our sense of worth no longer depends entirely upon them. The ancient teachers understood that human beings naturally seek belonging. That desire itself is not the problem. The problem arises when belonging requires the abandonment of authenticity. When acceptance demands that we silence our own voice. When the need to be loved becomes stronger than the courage to be honest. Throughout history, individuals who transformed the world often walked paths that were not immediately understood or accepted. They remained respectful. They remained compassionate. But they refused to measure truth solely through public approval. And perhaps this remains one of the most timeless lessons for modern life. You cannot build lasting peace upon temporary applause. The opinions of others will always change. Expectations will always evolve. The crowd that celebrates you today may criticize you tomorrow. But the relationship you build with your own conscience, that is the relationship you carry throughout your entire life. And perhaps true freedom begins when we learn to ask a different question. Not, will everyone accept me? But, can I respect the person I become through the choices I make? Because in the end, a life guided by inner values often creates a deeper form of acceptance. The acceptance that comes from finally being at peace with oneself. Across cultures and across generations, human beings have shared the same quiet longing. The desire to be seen, to be understood, to know that our lives matter. And there is nothing wrong with this desire. Connection is one of the greatest gifts of being human. From childhood, we learn about ourselves through the people around us. Encouragement gives us confidence. Acceptance gives us a sense of belonging. Love teaches us that we matter. But somewhere along the way, many of us begin to believe that external approval is the same thing as inner completeness. We tell ourselves that if enough people admire us, accept us, or validate our choices, we will finally feel at peace. Yet life teaches a different lesson. Because approval can comfort us, but it cannot define us. There is a profound difference between being seen by the world and truly knowing yourself. The world often sees our achievements, our appearance, and the roles we play. But self-understanding begins when we ask, who am I when there is no audience? Who am I when there is nothing left to prove? Many people spend years performing versions of themselves that feel acceptable to others. The successful one, the dependable one, the strong one. And while these identities may earn appreciation, they sometimes distance us from our authentic nature. True confidence requires something deeper. The courage to be imperfect. The courage to disappoint expectations when necessary. The courage to choose honesty over performance. Moments of silence often reveal this truth. When comparison fades and the noise becomes quieter, we begin to understand that our worth is not something we constantly need to earn. It is something we gradually learn to recognize within ourselves. And perhaps that is the deeper journey of life. Not becoming someone entirely new, but remembering that our value has never depended solely upon the approval of the world around us. Because when acceptance begins within, the opinions of others still matter. But they no longer control the peace we carry inside. Throughout history, wise thinkers across different cultures have shared a simple but powerful insight. A life built entirely upon external approval can never truly be peaceful. Because public opinion is always changing. The same people who admire you today may question you tomorrow. The expectations of society evolve with every generation. And if our self-worth depends completely upon these shifting forces, our inner peace becomes fragile. Many great philosophers reminded themselves that while we cannot control how others see us, we can influence the way we choose to live. Our character, our actions, our values. These are the foundations that remain within our hands. This does not mean ignoring advice or rejecting human connection. Relationships matter. Community matters. Learning from others is part of a meaningful life. But there is a difference between listening to the world and surrendering your identity to it. No person in history has been accepted by everyone. No meaningful path has existed without criticism or misunderstanding. And perhaps accepting this reality is one of the first steps toward freedom. Because when we stop demanding universal approval, we stop asking the impossible of ourselves. We begin to understand that authenticity always requires courage. The courage to speak honestly. The courage to live according to our values. And sometimes, the courage to disappoint expectations that were never truly ours to carry. Across time and cultures, the lesson remains the same. A good life is not measured by applause. It is measured by alignment. The alignment between what we believe, what we value, and how we choose to live. And when that alignment exists, something beautiful happens. The opinions of others still matter. Love and appreciation still enrich our lives. But they no longer define our worth. Because the strongest source of validation is no longer outside us. It begins to grow quietly from within. So how do we free ourselves from the endless need for validation? Perhaps the first step is realizing that appreciation and self-worth are not the same thing. It is beautiful to be loved. It is wonderful to be respected. Human beings thrive through meaningful connections. But the moment we make external approval the foundation of our identity, we hand our peace over to forces we cannot control. One simple practice is to do something meaningful without seeking recognition for it. Read a book without sharing it online. Take a walk without taking photographs. Create something simply because it brings you joy. These small moments remind us that not everything valuable needs an audience. Another important lesson is learning to separate performance from authenticity. Many people spend years trying to become the version of themselves that others expect. The responsible one, the successful one, the person who never disappoints anyone. But true self-respect begins when we allow ourselves to live according to our values rather than constant approval. This does not mean rejecting relationships or ignoring the people we love. It simply means remembering that acceptance from others is a gift, not a requirement for our existence. Perhaps one of the greatest acts of maturity is understanding that you cannot be deeply authentic and universally accepted at the same time. Some people will misunderstand your choices. Some expectations will remain unfulfilled. And that is part of being human. The goal is not to please everyone. The goal is to become someone you can genuinely respect. Because praise comes and goes. Opinions change. The world moves quickly from one story to the next. But the relationship you build with yourself remains throughout your entire life. And maybe that is the freedom wisdom has always pointed toward. The freedom to love without losing yourself. To contribute without performing. To grow without constantly asking for permission to be who you are. So the next time you find yourself seeking approval from the world around you, pause for a moment and ask a different question. Not, do they accept me? But, am I living in a way that reflects the person I truly wish to become? Because when that answer becomes yes, something remarkable happens. Validation from others still feels wonderful, but it no longer defines your worth. Thank you for spending these moments with me here at JK Wisdom Beyond Time. If these reflections resonate with you, I invite you to continue this journey with us as we explore ancient wisdom, modern psychology, and timeless truths for modern life. Until next time, take care of your mind. Take care of your heart. And remember, the deepest form of acceptance is not found in the applause of the world, but in the quiet respect you hold for yourself when no one else is watching.
The greatest freedom in life is not being accepted by everyone, but learning to respect yourself even when the world remains silent. When our worth no longer depends upon applause, we finally become free to live as our most authentic selves.